Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be talking about a series. That's right, we're back at it with series reviews. I do apologize for my left eye ahead of time. My allergies have been kicking my butt this morning. But if you are interested in talking about a League of Extraordinary Women series, which contains 4 books altogether in period time, romance, but also suffragette movement fashion with strong, interesting female lead characters, definitely stick around. It's reading time here at JB's Corner. So basically, this entire series is going to be focused on women who are part of the British suffragette movement in England, and they are basically pushing for women to have more rights towards properties, towards their own decisions, their bodies, their lives, everything essentially outside of male control. However, we're also following the love story of each of these wondrous women as well. The story set actually follows 4 different friends within the group. They can all be read as standalones as well, which makes it extra fun. For those that don't know, also I realized I didn't do an intro. My name is Jaya. I put out videos every Wednesday and Sunday, primarily on bookish related content. If that sounds like something fun for you guys, then definitely stick around for the video. If you guys do hear any drumming in the background, by the way, it's my husband. He's just practicing right now. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into these books. Starting with the first book, Bringing Down the Duke. In this book, we are actually following the women just now getting to a position where they have created a movement group, and they are primarily based at the university. I believe they are at Oxford, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, so everything is taking place on the Oxford University campus where Miss Annabelle finds herself. She was basically pretty much being the role of the maid at her family home after her father died. She's under the care of her older brother, who really doesn't know much and kind of is portrayed as a little bit of a moronic male who basically doesn't want to deal with any of the menial tasks around the house, and has Annabelle also deal with a lot of the financial components of their family as well. She unfortunately is embroiled in scandal before she finds herself in this position as well. Her father passed away, and she had a romantic entanglement with a duke that ended up not working in her favor, and she was basically called a fortune seeker. And so after that, her heart is battered and bruised, and she really doesn't have any main prospects. And so when she finds out she's been accepted into Oxford, she is very excited to go, and she realizes that she's going to do whatever is necessary to enroll in college. And her brother says you can go as long as you're able to make up the money that would be required in order to replace you to do the household chores. So she agrees to do that. In the process of going to Oxford, though, she also realizes that she wants to join the women's suffragette movement, and she ends up unintentionally finding herself sucked into their craziness. And in that process, she ends up meeting 3 other wonderful women. She ends up meeting Lucy, Katrina, and Hattie. And through the course of getting to know these women, she also inadvertently finds herself at the Duke's home, Montgomery's home. Sebastian Montgomery is a duke who is very, very powerful and affluent. He is also very well respected and sits on many of the main important meetings that are taking place within the government that also helps pass laws. He's currently not sympathetic towards the suffragette women movement, and he also has an overall negative idea of these women. He feels like they are debasing themselves to a certain level, and so he's also wary of who they are and like what their agenda is, or their goal is, if you will. And in this process also, it is found out that he is a little hardened towards women because his marriage ended in divorce. So he's a younger gentleman who's a little bit jaded. We also find out through the course of the book that he is responsible for basically raising his younger brother, who still is kind of a child and afraid of the responsibilities that come with his title. And he is also picking up the mess that his father has left behind because he was an avid gambler and ended up gambling away their estates and etc. And while Duke Montgomery has good standing with the Queen, he's going to do everything in his power to get his home back. And through the course of various events that occur, Miss Annabelle ends up finding herself at Duke Montgomery's home, and then in the course of this, he initially believes that she's there basically to seduce his younger brother. They start off on very, very horrible foot, and then as the book proceeds, she also finds herself an unwilling guest at his home because of the weather, and her ended up being trapped there. And through that course of recoverance, he and she end up realizing that they have a romance towards each other. And Sebastian Montgomery and Annabelle start to develop feelings. They also realize they come from different classes and they have to deal with all of that. Annabelle is also involved in the women's suffragette movement. And so it gets a little dicey, but throughout the course of the book, the romance is very sweet to read. It's also very sweet to see how Annabelle kind of gets Sebastian to see her cause and ends up getting him on her side, I should say, in terms of the suffragette movement. But I will say, in terms of the overall book, this definitely focused more on the romance, less on Annabelle as an independent, strong woman, less on the actual suffragette movement. There's a couple of moments that happen specific to the suffragette movement. There's like a mass protest that basically happens, like a peaceful protest that cops end up showing up to, and she ends up getting thrown in jail. That was like the one highlight moment, I would say, of this book where you really see like her movement in the suffragette movement. But other than that, she just seems like a young girl who's just been down on her luck and doesn't really know where to go, and inadvertently falls in love with this very, very rich man and has to figure out like what that means for her. And it's a very like will they, won't they romance as well. It's interesting. I would say that Bringing Down the Duke was my least favorite of all four of these books. I did end up giving it a hard 3 stars. I would say that it's still entertaining enough that you want to continue the series, because the other girls definitely have more spitfire in my humble opinion. But I do also think Annabelle redeems herself in future books in the way that she's there for her friends and the way that she still supports the cause in whatever way she can after she has more means. But in this initial book, it was a hard struggle to really, really feel her presence, if you will, in the suffragette movement. But overall, still a very entertaining book. The second book in the series is called A Rogue of One Own, and this one was probably my favorite. This is following the story of Lucy, who is the main female suffragette leader. She is very, very spicy, very quirky. She doesn't really consider herself beautiful, but she does consider herself very intelligent. Because of her movement in the suffragette camp, she's kind of been disowned by her family. She doesn't really have close ties with any of them. However, her father hasn't like completely disowned her, so she still has her own allowance to live off of, which is what gives her the freedom to really push for these women's movements. She is also very well read, very well bred. However, she consistently finds herself on the outskirts of society, and she feels that because her entire focus and her entire life is dedicated to the movement for women, she's never going to experience true romance or love. Enter Ballantyne. Tristan Ballantyne is our main male character in this book. He's known to be a rake. He's known to be striking. He's known to have been in the army at one point for the war, and since he has returned, he is at battles with his father because his elder brother was actually killed during the war. And so now he finds himself in the precarious position of becoming the next earl. However, in the process of all of this, he also realizes that his father is willing to blackmail him to put him in a position of a favorable marriage, and also is basically using every advantage he has against Tristan to get him to do what he wants in his bidding. In order to do this, he's basically using Tristan's mother as a bartering chip because she has been very, very depressed and going through bouts of like hallucinations, if you will, ever since her son died. She's still very much present and lucid, but because of all of her depression, her behavior is not that which you would expect from a lady, and it's well past the point of mourning. So because of this, the father is consistently threatening to send the mom off to an asylum, which are known in this particular case, the type of asylum the father would send the mother to. It would be very harsh on his mother, and Tristan doesn't think she'll make it. So knowing that he is using his mother as a bartering chip, Tristan is then going to do everything in his power to make sure he can get back at his father. Tristan is also an author. He has written bunches of poetry and has published books, and all the women are waiting for his next poetry book, and he has therefore some means of his own. He decides to concentrate on continuing to build his own means, and in this process ends up vying to buy the same printing press that Lucy also has some standing investment in. Now, what makes this book very special is that this is a second chance romance. These two characters were embroiled together from a young age, at the age of 11, 12, 13. They usually had more of a negative interaction with one another, very much rivalry vibes, but as they've grown older, they realize that in having to work together and also trying to precariously work around each other in terms of navigating the printing press, they find that they can actually be allies. And Lucy also realizes that as much as she doesn't want to, she is attracted to Valentine. And so when an offer is placed at her feet, when she thinks she's going to be a spinster for the rest of her life, that, hey, take me on as a lover and you can kind of do what you want with your printing press type of vibes, she decides to jump at it. She does not know that he's betrothed currently to be married to her stepsister. The book then progresses from there much more quickly. Overall, there's a lot of scandal and craze and all these types of things, but the story itself is very beautiful, and it was really nice to see how supportive Valentine actually is of Lucy and how much he's loved her since a very young age without it ever being shown. We also get to see him dealing with a little bit of PTSD and a little bit of just hyped up energy that has nowhere to go ever since he's come back from the war. So we kind of see him reeling with that. We see how he deals with his own childhood traumas of growing up in a very abusive family with his father. And then we also get to see Lucy's softer side, which was really fun to see, but also holding on to her leadership skills as the main lead suffragette. And I think it was also very sweet to see her relationship with the other three girls. And in this book in particular, like I was saying, Annabelle really strives to be a good friend and is actually seen to be supportive in her own right as well. And she and Montgomery basically host multiple events trying to push the suffragette agenda while also giving them an opportunity to come into polite society in a sweeter way in terms of balls and dinners and things like that. So it's really cool to see how her positional change actually helps in future books. And it was also very sweet to see Lucy's hard exterior start to break down a little bit, and we see that she's more than just her strong exterior. Overall, this one was probably one of my favorites. I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was a solid 4.5-star read. I think it was just really fun, exciting, and the scandal is broiling in this period history novel. The third in this series is Portrait of a Scotsman. This book was a little bit different. This is following the story of Hattie. Of all of the ladies in the book, Hattie is the one who comes from the most affluent family. She is also one of the younger daughters, and she's believed to not be as quote-unquote business savvy as the other members of her family, including her older sister and her brothers, because of the fact that she does have dyslexia, which is obviously not diagnosed in that term in this book, but it's very apparent that that's what's going on. And because of that, she's kind of focused all of her energy into art and photography. She's an avid painter. She's very interested in the art of photography, and she's consistently interested in pursuing the arts. In the course of the previous book, we find out that she is actually introduced to a character that's a little bit morally gray, and that would be Lucian Blackstone. He is basically a young Scottish man that ends up coming from low-level tier of like boy urchin on the street to a very well-off, very rich man who has made his way into polite society on the fringes by basically holding on to secrets of other lords, because by putting himself in a power place, he's also able to be a lender to all of these lords. However, he deals in secrets. So when it suits him, he is willing to cash in those secrets in order to bring the lords to heel. For this reason, he is he's not respected. He's feared and he's allowed in polite company, but he's not treated like a gentleman or a lord. In order to further position himself in a better place, he basically puts Charlotte, or Miss Hattie, in a very difficult position where she is then forced to accept his hand in marriage. The rest of the book basically plays on both of them finding a relationship with one another that is true and loving and caring, and Lucian starting to realize that he actually cares about Hattie outside of just her name. And meanwhile, Hattie also realizes that Lucian is not quite the brute that she thinks he is. We also realize that Lucian has a very solid heart, especially towards like the underclass, underprivileged workers. This is the book that really introduces the idea of fighting for women's rights for people who are of poorer classes, not necessarily genteel women, but women who are, common day-to-day workers, people who are going into the mines in order to support their family and are doing like tasks in order to support their families that may not have the option or the opportunity to stay at home and just raise their children. This is following the people working in those mines, and we also quickly learned that Lucian became an orphan because he lost his mother and sister in one of the accidents in the tunnels, and that's why he holds a grudge towards one of the lords that he is seeking revenge against. Throughout the course of the book, we kind of also discover that Hattie finds a way to kind of relate to these women and really pull out their stories. And she gets into photography, and she really wants to create an entire gallery showcasing these working women and making people understand that there's more to see than they may think. And she does it in a way where she basically takes these hard workers and puts them into genteel settings where she doesn't change anything about their outer appearance except for their clothes, in order for the higher level echelon crowd to realize that these people are just like them. Because as long as they are separate and there is that hierarchy, oftentimes they dismiss the lower class. But by putting the lower class in these type of settings and in these type of frivolous outfits and things like that, it brings them one step closer and therefore increases a humane aspect. Overall, the book is very sweet, and I think Hattie's character in particular was very sweet to see, because in this book, outside of just being the frivolous side character that's supportive of her friends and wants to be part of the movement, this is the part where she really finds her place and finds her role in how she can affect change. And she also finds the perfect match for her, for all of her beauty and all of her softness and all of her ladylike qualities that she has been raised with. Lucian is the exact opposite. Between the two of them, they really realize that there's a beauty to both sides of the coin, and they are able to raise each other as a couple and succeed in what they're trying to accomplish in society. And it was just such a sweet book to read. And I also think it's just so cool, all the different little things that Lucian gets to do, because he is a slightly morally gray character. Overall, though, great book. Definitely enjoyed this one. Strongly would recommend. This is a 4-star read for me, and I absolutely enjoyed this book. The last and final book is following the story of Katrina, who is a Scottish woman who is basically raised as the equivalent of a male by her parents, who are very forward for their time. They have raised Katrina to be very well educated, very well spoken, and are encouraging her to write her own novel. She also consistently finds herself in situations where romance has not worked for her. Situations with men has often ended up in awkward moments, and she finds that she can't trust her gut when it comes to men because of the heartbreaks that she's had. She also is the most loyal friend, and she will do anything for the suffragette cause, but she also has a difficult time saying no. And so she's really finding herself pulled and strained. Through the course of this book, she meets Elias, who is a young gentleman who's coming from the eastern side of the world. I want to say, what was it? Middle East. I mean, they just say Middle East. I want to say Ottoman Empire time. That sounds wrong. That's clearly wrong. But essentially, it was happening in the Middle East. And he comes from a family that basically has good standing, but simultaneously are known for helping recover stolen artifacts, which is how he finds himself in the home of Katrina. He has basically come to befriend her father, who has a standing in Oxford and is very well recognized there as a professor. And one of the other professors on staff at the Oxford University happens to be an avid collector of various treasures, and he happens to recently have excavated a few archaeological pieces and have had them brought to him. And in that group of archaeological pieces, it has included the items that Elias is trying to basically bring back to his home country. So while he and his brother, or cousin brother, are trying to figure out the best way to bring these items back, he also ends up working with Katrina, because the professor is unfortunately called away. And Katrina basically is meant to be his lead in Oxford and his primary introduction to all of these professors. Unbeknowingly to both of them, because they're forced to spend a lot of time with each other, they realize that there's more to each other than they think. And Katrina can definitely be seen as a very well-educated, very strong, very well put together, morally correct compass type of character. And Elias finds himself being drawn to this woman unintentionally. He ends up in a position where he then has to decide what's more important, getting the artifacts back or pursuing a relationship with Katrina. And Katrina has to decide, outside of just helping him retrieve these artifacts, is there more to this relationship that she wants to pursue? Is she willing to put her heart on the line? And in the midst of all of this, between Annabelle and Montgomery, the Duke Montgomery, Hattie and Lucian Blackstone, who also has a bunch of dirt on everybody and is one of the richest men, and Tristan Valentine, who is a rake of his own but has his own money from his poetry as well as from his long-standing ancestry, and Lucy, the three couples basically assist Katrina in getting all of these products to where they, not products, these artifacts back to where they need to go, and also offer a helping ear and hand to Katrina whenever she doesn't know what to do with herself. This was probably one of the cutest books I've read. I also love the fact that Katrina knows her own mind in this time and world where women are told what they can and cannot do, how they should and should not use their body, how they should or should not interact with other people. Katrina is one of those people who really grabs life by the horns, is going to do whatever she wants to do when she wants to do it. She hates the constraints and labels that are put on her because she's a lady, and because she comes from a family where her father has been more willing to give her freedom. It also allows her to balance that line a little bit more precariously of following quote-unquote decorum versus being her own person. And that mindset made this book very interesting because she was different than all the other book's characters because she knew her own mind. And because of that, it makes it very interesting to read because she and Elias are truly equals in their footing in this book. I do think it was a very well-written novel. I loved the banter between the two characters. I love what sparked their romance, being their intelligence and their way that they, are able to feed off each other in terms of conversation. But I also love the overarching idea of like trying to get these artifacts back. Like I just felt the adventure in this book was way more fun. And overall, the romance was just a fun read. I do think this is a great book to read, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I ended up giving this a 4 stars as well. And that does bring us to the conclusion of this particular series. If you guys did end up making it through this far, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know there were a few spoilers here and there in that review, but I tried to keep it as vague as possible so that it doesn't take away from the overall plot or arching depictions in the book. I still think it's worthwhile to read all 4 books, and I do think they're very enjoyable. And I do think Evie Dunmore's writing style, as well as the couples being discussed in each book, becomes more and more complex, more and more interesting. And I love the way that the character growths continue past their own individual novels and their friends' novels as well. I love the way the suffragette movement is pulled in. I love the final epilogue in the last book as well, where we really get to see how far the women are able to push the movement and how far they come after, they've lived life and their grandmothers and all such things. It's a very, very sweet series. And I do think when it comes to period romance, instead of just being your classic, oh my gosh, I love you period romance, which is always fun, like Bridgerton vibes, always great. I do like the fact that this had the added benefit of these women having their own spines and being powerful women of their own right and truly, truly being a part of historic change, even if it is historical fiction. Because if characters like this had not existed, then the women's movement would have never happened. And I, as a woman, for one, do really, really feel a sense of gratitude towards all of these women in our past that really paved the road for us to have our rights. So this overall series, I think, was just a fun read. And I think as far as period romances go, it was excellent. I will also say all of the books are spicy. They do have intimate spice scenes in them. I would say there's probably at least 3 chapters of that per book. However, the overarching storyline does not actually require it. The spice to be there in order to enjoy the book, so you could potentially skip those sections if you wanted to. However, I will say they're well placed, they're well written, and it actually flows naturally in these books, which I did appreciate. All of the relationships are created based on mutual appreciation of both the male and female character of the other person's actual individuality. The only book that I felt like kind of pushed the agenda of physical romance a little bit more without necessarily acting upon it was the 3rd book, because it was unfortunately an unplanned unwanted wedding situation. So initially all they have to go off of is physical attractiveness, but I do appreciate how much of a gentleman Lucian is, and I do appreciate the fact that both Hattie and Lucian develop a personal relationship before they jump into that stage of their marriage. And I do think overall the books were just very well written. At this point, I do also realize I'm rambling, so I'm gonna stop. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. For those of you that are new here, I love all things books. I have a crazy fiction addiction, and I also love memoirs every once in a while here and there. And so I've just been loving books. And this all started because this particular review started because last month I was having a slight reading slump and I didn't know what theme I wanted to read for the month. And so the chits that I made and drew from ended up suggesting prompts for reading a book on my e-reader, doing a dystopian or sci-fi novel, and then any kind of historical period romance, which is how I fell upon these books. They've been sitting on my shelf for quite some time now from my Book of the Month collections, and I felt like it was the perfect time to get into them. If you enjoyed this type of series review, I talk all things books and put out videos every Wednesday and Sunday. On rare occasions, I will have some randomness in there as well, travel-based blogs, weddings, things like that. But for the most part, it is a bookish channel. And if that sounds fun, I would love to have you be a part of our community, and I would love to have you join us on this little corner of the internet. If you are interested, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell. For those of you that are returning, I cannot thank you enough. You guys are such a blessing, and you have supported me so much in this journey that I've been taking, and it's so nice to read all your comments and see you guys watching the videos, because I really do feel like it's about cultivating a bookish community here in this corner, and I would not be able to do that without the support of every one of you. That being said, I will end this video with this. I hope wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, evening, or night, that you're getting plenty of time to feel safe, rested, secure, and getting plenty of time for self-care and reading. I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye, guys.